Kamala Harris accomplished everything she needed to last night. She needed to accomplish a lot. Knocked it out of the park. The vice president's known for being a politician who really prepares, and it was clear that she took her debate prep very seriously. Philippe Reines is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and former spokesman for Hillary Clinton. And Reines played the role of Donald Trump in Clinton's debate prep back in 2016. There he is in what appears to be kind of like a flip phone video in costume, role-playing a scenario where Trump tried to hug Clinton and then chased her around the room for said hug. Reines reprised the role of Trump in Kamala Harris's preparations for last night's debate, self-tenor and all, and he joins me now. Philippe, it's good to have you. First, what'd you think of that debate?
I could watch it all night. I mean, she put on a clinic. There's really, I mean, there's no part of it you can watch that says that's bad. She should have redone it. It was a remarkable performance. I know the former president is saying the same thing, but as usual, one of them is lying and one of them is not.
So take me through the prep. First of all, what was your approach in that prep to playing Trump? And what are the kind of signature things he does in debates that you were doing? And then how was that kind of gamed out and prepared for?
Well, first, you know, my role in it is the kind of sexy part of it, but I really just had to focus on the left side of the screen, which is him. There's a team that helps the vice president that was headed up by Karen Dunn and Rohini Kasula, who, I mean, it was amazing. And it was a frictionless team that I've worked with other teams, and it was great. The vice president has great people around her. I mean, it was not just the two of them, but they co-ran it. From my perspective, you just want the candidate to get used to what they're going to see and hear and experience. And there was that added oddity that they'd never met. And what's great is I had never met her. The first day that I met her, I said, Madam Vice President, it's nice to meet you. And then 20 minutes later, I was telling her how she was ruining America.
Did you, what was your approach? What are the most important things to prepare for if you're debating Trump? Like the sort of go-to moves, the things that might rattle someone who hasn't been in the same room with them?
Well, I would take it a step back. I mean, a debate in its ideal form is a job interview. You have two people who are going for the same position, who want to put their experience and their best foot forward. They want to be professional. They want to think about curveballs that might come their way. And you know, we've all been in that situation. The situation we haven't been in is when the other candidate for the job is 6 feet to your left and they've got a chainsaw, and the only way that they can win is by, you know, blooding you up. And the challenge there is, you know, you have to make some decisions. But what she did last night that was so amazing is that she wasn't just pointing out things that that might get under his skin. She was making her case directly to camera to the American people. She was talking about her plans. And what was also incredibly amazing is that she did something that no one else has really been able to do in the last year, which is remind people that this guy actually served and has a record, and that record is really bad. And, you know, you've talked about this. This amnesia issue is a problem, where he starts out saying, you know, you completely screwed the border. It's got to be, hold on, pal. You were there for 4 years. You were in charge of the border, and you promised us a wall, and it's not there. And that hasn't happened enough, and it's important to lay out that case. And third, I mean, from my own in terms of asking about prep, first of all, you know, we all get makeup before we're on TV, and the makeup artist here said, you already have makeup on, and I said, no. And she said, well, you've got it on your forehead. I can't get it off. I mean, it's so caked on. The guy uses, you know, like plaster of Paris. But the thing that I noticed over the 8 years, and by the way, I feel like it was 50 years when you say a flip phone. I mean, it wasn't black and white, Chris, is that he's really decompensating. I mean, his language has always been choppy. He's always digressed. There's something else going on there. I think we all watch it, and it's like, oh, he always speaks like that. He does not. He's losing, like, if I lose track of my thoughts, I stop for a second. When he loses track of his thoughts, he just goes to another thought quickly. So it doesn't sound like anything. It just sounds like he's jumping around. That's not what he's doing. He's also seemingly, he'll go off on COVID for 10 minutes and not say Tony Fauci. I mean, 4 years ago, he would go on for 5 minutes about Tony Fauci. So there's something you know, I'm in the camp that has always noticed that, but just very narrowly in terms of watching everything he has said and done over the last few months and reading every word, there's something not right up there.
Yeah, and you know, we'll only play a little selection, and one of these selections, which we'll play in a second, is sort of notorious. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, which of course is both a sort of disgusting and racist slander to a group of people, and also completely invented. But that answer he started on the rallies. Like, we played that rallies clip. He got from like, people go to my rallies to that, and you know, he cannot follow a train of thought. He interrupts himself. Here's just a little smattering of what that looked like.
She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. She was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out. Wait a minute. I'm talking now. If you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar?
He was very proud of that last one. He referred to it as cute, and he gave a little kudos to himself afterwards that he was like calling back a I'm speaking moment. In terms of the sort of set pieces, like the baiting, how much of that was planned? Like, it seemed to me that there were certain things that he won't leave alone. John McCain, Charlottesville, very fine people, the outcome of the January 6th election, his rallies that were intentionally seeded in her answers to get him to narcissistically obsess over them.
I think, look, you know, she has seen him over the years. The guy's debated 7 times. This was his 7th general election. He debated, I think, 11 times in the primaries, notably 0 times in the 2024 primaries, and yet he calls everyone out for being scared. I think she was almost acting like she was watching it, like she was, you know, kind of watching it on TV and saying, hold on, dude. I mean, what about this? Because that's what she was doing, was calling out facts. You know, what's particularly, I think, telling when you show these clips of his digressions or whatever you want to call them is that they make no sense. So fine. He's not Rubik's Cube. He's not hard to figure out. He's Jenga. You know, you just push one thing and he falls apart. But if you say your crowd sizes are low and people leave, why wouldn't you say that's not true? That's very mean. I'm really proud. They're the biggest things. What he actually starts doing is a different level of insanity.
Yes.
I mean, you're revealing it's a subset. I mean, what he's saying has never been truthful. It has never been real. It has never been normal, but it is decompensating. And I think because it's, you know, the thing about the frog, you know, in water, if you just boil them slowly, they don't know what's happening. We've all been so kind of inured to it that we don't realize how serious this is. And look, Joe Biden, I love Joe Biden. When Joe Biden was 78 and he ran for president, no one thought, I'm concerned at how he looks. Donald Trump is 78. You know, if he wins, we could be back in this conversation in 2 years. How are we supposed to know that he was going to go off the rails?
Did you do off the rails as him?
You do everything. I mean, I'm the ball machine in my mind. You know, you got a good tennis player who wants to get better. I have friends who are obsessed with tennis. They get a tennis pro. You want to test your backhand, you set the ball machine to test your backhand. You want to do your forehand. If you want to use the ball machine as a target for your serve, great. It's simulation. I think any kind of prep, whether it's congressional prep, deposition prep, or any kind of interview, you want people to have thought things through. It's not like you're sitting around saying, okay, here is a good line, memorize it. There's been some great stories that I'm sure you know that people would love about the biggest moments in debate history have been the candidates thinking about them when they're not in prep.
Yeah.
You know, Lloyd Benson, I knew John Kennedy. He actually snapped at his team when they said Dan Quayle might say that he knew Jack Kennedy. Lloyd Benson apparently said, if you guys are going to waste my time, I'm not going to. And he walked out of the room. George Bush, when, Al Gore crowded him, he had this smirk on his face, and Bush has said that the smirk on his face was because his team had crowded him in the hotel room. And he said, what are you doing? They said, well, Gore has sometimes done that. He's like, I don't care who's done that. Get out of my face with that.
Right,
and then
yeah.
when the moment comes, you're like, holy cow, I've heard this.
Philippe Reines, thank you very much for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Peter, I turn to you first because you were at Ground Zero with President Biden, as well as the VP, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance. What was it like to see Kamala Harris and Donald Trump together? The only thing separating them was little Mike Bloomberg standing between them, 12 hours after an absolutely brutal debate?
Yeah, there was something kind of surreal about it, right? I mean, they had spent an hour and a half on stage savaging each other, calling each other a disgrace and weak and horrible and all these, insulting things. And then they were the next day, basically, as you say, 10 hours later, standing under the same tent at 9/11. And it was, in fact, Mike Bloomberg who actually reached out to touch Kamala Harris to get her to turn around to draw her in to shake Donald Trump's hand. And they did have a seemingly friendly handshake. In fact, Trump seems to have said something pleasant to her, even patted her hand. And they, got along fine. But it's a reminder, I think, not of how politics used to be, where there used to be kind of respect across the aisle. Instead, I think it's a reminder of how important 9/11 still is, the solemnity of this moment, that it forces politicians who really don't like each other very much to at least pretend that they're part of the same country, the same nation, the same, society, at least for an hour on there at such hallowed ground.
Well, it is something that New Yorkers are so proud of, the way we come together. But it is something, when Mike Bloomberg is the one asking you to be polite, that is a rare day. Michael, let's talk, though, about 9/11. I mean, a truly devastating day for our country, especially for New Yorkers. And on that day, Donald Trump made a point of saying that his building became the tallest in New York City after the World Trade Center fell. Not only was that a grotesque thing to say, it was also a lie. Along with the other lie, he told that thousands of Muslims were standing on roofs of buildings in New Jersey celebrating the attacks. That's who Donald Trump was 23 years ago today. So why is anyone surprised that 23 years shy, one day later, last night on the debate stage, he lied for 90 minutes straight? That's who he is.
Yeah, that's who he is, and that's that's who he was 23 years ago, and that's who he is today. Look, Donald Trump has never been sensitive to the moment. He did not understand the gravity of 9/11. He didn't process it. What he did process was now he has the tallest building in New York. That's what he processed. The other thing he processed, was conspiracy theories that Muslims, keeping with this vein of anti-Muslim hatred that tried to emerge on the heels of 9/11, but for the guidance and soft words, actually, of President Bush to remind us who we are in a moment like this, he would have gone down that rabbit hole and tried to perpetuate those lies about Muslims, stirring up anti-Muslim hate among white people. That's basically that's his MO. So it doesn't surprise me that he's standing on the stage 23 years later with a black woman who's running for president, parroting the same BS. And nor should the rest of us be surprised, especially the media that's covered him for 23 years, especially in the last 9 years. So I wish the media would stop acting surprised when Donald Trump behaves a certain way, because you've been covering that ish for as long as he's been on the stage. And I think that's something that a lot of Americans, as you look at this moment, are trying to pull themselves away from this sort of, oh my God, look at Donald Trump perform again. We're tired of it. And there is a level of exhaustion that a lot of Americans have, which is, it's opened up this moment for Kamala Harris the way it has. She just said, y'all got to be tired by now, because I know I am. So let's go this way. Let's go forward.
In 2016, one could make the argument for a lot of Americans, he was a new face, he was a new voice. People like the way he spoke directly. But now, in 2024, people know exactly who Donald Trump is. There are no surprises. But Molly, Frank Luntz had one of the most notable tweets of the night, and I'm just going to share it with our audience. If Harris wants to win, she needs to train her face not to respond. It feeds into a female stereotype, and more importantly, it risks offending undecided voters. What a harebrained idea you had there, Frank. Are you kidding me, Molly? Are you kidding me? Yes, this is a stereotype if you're living in 1982.
Well, you know, I don't like to commit media on media violence, but in this case, I did troll him and say this is just totally misogynistic. But I thought it was interesting,
stupid,
and it is also very stupid, and it isn't what happened at all.
That's the point,
right? And I think that's the most interesting thing was she actually got the power, she used the power. I read today this Sarah Longwell piece in the Atlantic about how a lot of these on the fence voters were saying she looked presidential. And I read some other, sort of on the fence voters were saying that they related when she was laughing. So I do think that it was just something from another century. And look, there are these sort of hot take punditry things and some of them are misogynistic. And the idea that she can't have normal facial expressions is one of them.
But Molly, isn't this like she really won the game of TV last night? She could have had a lot of totally normal, outraged, fired up responses, but she showed incredible discipline.
Yeah.
Right? Like a silent assassin, letting him spin himself like a top.
Yeah. And she did a ton of research. She did a ton of prep, and you could tell because she sort of knew what would get him, and then she stepped back and let him do it. And that was just a sort of, she's been very good at kind of proving the doubters wrong.
He did prep. It was Tulsi Gabbard and Laura Loomer who prepped him. I'm going to leave that there. All right, Peter, we're hearing Team Trump go on and on today how unfair it was because he got fact-checked way more than Kamala Harris did. But here's the thing. Of course he did. Donald Trump spent the entire night repeating well-known lies. And the fact checks, they were pretty basic, right? It's not an aggressive fact check to say, I'm sorry, sir, nobody's eating animals or killing babies.
Yeah, I mean, if there's more fact checking, it's because there are more facts or alleged facts to check, right? And no question about it. He laid out a whole lot of things that were obviously completely false or fictional. One of my favorites is where he says that everybody in the country, liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, wanted Roe v. Wade overturned so the abortion issue could go back to the states. That's obviously not even close to true. Last poll I showed, so 60% were opposed to overturning Roe v. Wade, but he has said this repeatedly now as if it was true and somehow doesn't seem to be daunted when people do fact check him. And as you rightly say, the eating dogs episode, I think, is one of the things we'll remember most about last night, if not just because it wasn't true, but because it seemed so farcical and absurd to bring it up in the first place. But, look, the moderators got criticized the last time around when Trump faced off Joe Biden for not doing more real-time fact-checking. I'm sympathetic. It's really hard to do that in the moment if you stop every single sentence that a politician says, and particularly a politician like Donald Trump, and says, wait a second, there's fuller context here. This isn't quite right. Here's something you didn't say. There's a balance to be had between allowing a debate to go forward and allowing the other person in the debate to challenge, factual misassertions, and not allowing, complete falsehoods to be, put on your air. And that's a tough balance for any moderators to take. I think the moderators last night did a good job.
If Donald Trump is if anybody's going to be mad about Donald Trump repeating these dog stories, he should be mad at Fox News and J.D. Vance for feeding him this puppy chow. He said it right on TV. He learned it from watching his favorite TV personalities. Michael, do you think at the end of the night, at the end of the day, any votes were changed last night? Because before the debate, we talked all about the undecided voters who said they didn't know enough about her. They hadn't seen her last night. And last night, she put on a show, and so did he.
Yeah, generally, I would say probably just a little bit at the margins, maybe perhaps around the corner, or somebody said, oh, yeah, I think I'm going to vote differently. That was not this debate. I think this debate did have more than a marginal impact on voters. I think it was apparent in some of the overnight reaction and responses from focus groups as well as spot polls that were taken. When you're showing 60+% of the people watching the debate said that Kamala Harris won. Yeah, and when a lot of those voters are, sort of undecided, center-right, independent voters who have largely been on the fence because of their hesitation around Joe Biden, and now feel a little bit more engaged in leaning into this conversation for the presidency. Yeah, I think it did, and I think she acquitted herself as a president should. And that was important because going into this, one of the things I was very interested in seeing how she would manage was her prosecutorial instincts up against her presidential mantle. And she was able to hold that presidential mantle in front of the American people while she spanked that behind a little bit along the way as a prosecutor, and I appreciated that. I appreciated that because that's what she needed to do, and I think a lot of voters responded to that. I think Peter, in his reporting, and others, could probably sense that there was something different about this. Not to put Peter on the spot, but something different about this debate as opposed to some of the others. That the voters were receiving this a little bit differently than they had Bush v. Gore or, the first Biden and Trump debate.
Kamala Harris at the debate, taking control, the visuals, the atmosphere. It all showed Trump upset and unmoored. He was inaccurate, sometimes unhinged. And the collective result, which is where we start the program tonight, is a display where Harris put Trump on defense. That's the Washington Post headline. The reality was palpable. The split screens that often contrasted Trump's honestly seething anger with Harris's more composed approach. The smiles, her rejoinders. No candidate wants to be on defense at a debate, but especially not Trump, a politician who staked his whole career on his supposed version of dominance, of going on offense. That's more about what Trump is, according to his followers, what they say they like about him, than any particular policy or promise. So this was uncomfortable turf for him, and people saw it live. We can tell you tonight, 67 million people watching, a higher number, for example, than the Biden-Trump debate. What happened last night matters because it reached so many more voters than any other political event this year, more than the conventions or President Biden's big address announcing his exit. And what is happening today, we're seeing, is being burned into the public imagination. The idea, the view, the conclusion that Harris won, and winning builds momentum, and people famously ditch losers. One day out, I can show you the Trump loss is on Times cover, branding him in trouble. The reviews have been rolling in, and broad mainstream coverage has basically said Harris bested Trump, and he was off balance and out of control.
Pick your adjective. I would go with fiery to begin.
You had one candidate that was completely unhinged, just completely off his rocker.
Kamala Harris pitched a shutout.
I spoke with one Republican who called former President Trump wild and uncontrolled.
Vice President Harris had a plan. She stuck to her plan.
Clearly, Vice President Harris kicked some butt.
I've never seen a starker contrast in presentation from two candidates in any debate, in any type of contest, in any political race.
That's the interpretation. Here's what they were interpreting.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. People start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. The people on television say my dog was taken and used for food.
Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice
We'll
President
find
Harris.
out.
They say you're a disgrace. You are a disgrace. It is well known that he admires dictators.
Viktor Orban, one of the most respected men. They call him a strong man. I know Putin very well.
A dictator who would eat you for lunch.
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all. We lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically.
I didn't detect the sarcasm.
Clearly, he is having a very difficult time processing that.
Harris set the tone from the start. In a moment that might be in the history books, we'll show you Trump was going straight for his lectern, apparently trying to avoid the traditional handshake that starts it. And you see she crossed over into his area, forcing him into the handshake. She did that, and Trump found himself in a defensive crouch across much of the night, as the Times reports, relitigating his record rather than picking apart Harris's. And you might see that coverage and have watched the debate and thought, yeah, of course, and he has a lot to defend. But remember, that's not automatic. Harris is still in the incumbent administration. And Trump has previously turned many debates and other TV moments into attacks on his rivals. It is a function of how she performed, and perhaps also where we are now, having dealt with Trump for so long, that he wasn't able to pull off those tricks last night, even as he did steal or take more of the talk time. That same theme of defense was blasted in headlines in swing states. Here's Nevada's Las Vegas Sun. You can see Harris puts Trump on defense. National papers reported the same. Harris knocking him off course. Trump in the spotlight in the worst way. Now, those are reports and accounts. There were also other indications about Trump's poor performance from him. In contrast to the Biden debate, which we all lived through recently, Donald Trump got off the stage and began complaining about the ABC moderators, complaining the network should have its whole license revoked, which is not something you say when you are winning. If you thought you won or did very well, you would want to buck up the debate, not discredit it. And then there's the odd but very Americana tradition of the spin rooms. We've shown you here some file footage from back in the day. I'm sure you're familiar with the custom. The campaign staff and the allies go into these so-called spin rooms, and you say your side won no matter what. It's kind of an odd tradition. Well, Trump was actually the first debate participant to ever drop in on one of those spin rooms himself back in 2016, but he hadn't done it since then until last night. The Post reporting Donald Trump showed up in the spin room after the debate, a rarity, an obvious sign of his need to try to make the case to reporters that he had failed to make on the debate stage. You can see Trump in last night's spin room. Again, this is unusual, hasn't happened in a long time. And that same Post article, as you look at this visual, I'll tell you, said Trump may have recognized he fell short, and he tried to basically tell a much smaller audience in that room something different than what a much larger audience just saw on the stage, that he was on defense, that he lost the night. Now, Trump's aides, they did the spinning, and some of his allies would also spin. Again, some of these people are literally paid to say he won. But I want to show you something really interesting here. Even his own allies conceding it was a bad night for Trump. Senator Lindsey Graham said as much. Conservative commentators who might have a bit more daylight between their careers and the future of Trumpism went further. These are damning statements you're about to hear. I'll show them to you in a second. The big picture, the consensus, is not only that Harris won the debate, but that she won it at this critical time. That's the best thing a candidate can aim for in any debate, and some years we know there are many and they all happen. But when you win the only debate scheduled right now between today and the rest of the election, well, you have a crucial edge. Her allies, though, at the same time, amidst all of this, are reiterating that nothing last night tells you who will win the election. Now, as for the video I promised you, we've got these Republican lawmakers from Fox to voter panels admitting, conceding, saying Trump had a bad night or lost. Fox's sister publication, The Wall Street Journal, published a piece today saying Harris clearly won the debate. And now, I want to bring you a little beat video special. We've pulled together, if you were watching on this channel or any other single channel, you might not have seen this, but we've made it for you. Some of the Republican and conservative voices that have been conceding how badly Trump did. Much of this presented to Fox and conservative viewers.
Make no mistake about it. Trump had a bad night.
Whoever did debate prep for Donald Trump should be fired.
This was pretty much her night.
You're saying she had a good night?
I'm saying she certainly did.
Talk about migrants eating dogs and cats. I mean, that's something Saturday Night Live would do.
He was awful tonight. She, on the other hand, was very well prepared.
He was terrible tonight. Former President Trump did take a lot of the bait that she threw out.
He took all the bait and none of the opportunities. She pivoted better.
He rose to the bait repeatedly when she baited him.
She baited a former president of the United States to chase every rabbit down every hole.
He was childish. He was creepy. He was cringy.
And we heard so many of the old grievances that we'd long thought that Trump had learned were not winners politically.
He was wholly unprepared.
Vice President Harris was clearly well prepared, practiced on the offensive much of the night.
He went down a few cat and dog holes rather than rabbit holes tonight.
I guess there are avenues worse than rabbit holes. And even viewers who went to hear some alternative explanation of what happened on Fox ended up hearing that.
And we begin tonight with 55 days to go until Election Day, with early voting starting even sooner. And last night, Vice President Kamala Harris delivered a masterclass in how to stick the landing in a debate. It all started in those first few seconds with that power move handshake and Harris introducing herself to Trump, perhaps because it was the first time the two have been face to face, or maybe so she could let him hear the proper way to pronounce her name. And from then on, she kept laying the bait, and Trump just kept falling for it.
What you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
First, let me respond as to the
Please.
rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics.
World leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace.
Let me just tell you about world leaders. Viktor Orban, one of the most respected men, they call him a strong man.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that.
You talk about a threat to democracy. He got 14 million votes and they threw him out of office. And you know what? I'll give you a little secret. He hates her. He can't stand her.
And that's pretty much how it went all night, with Trump stuck on the ropes, unable to regain his footing. And as I said last night, Trump got destroyed in this debate for one main reason. Not because the debate was rigged, as Trump has already claimed, or because the moderators were mean to him. It was because he cannot control his own mind. His performance was so bad that even his pals on Fox had to admit it.
Make no mistake about it. Trump had a bad night.
I don't think the American people are watching and thinking any of these people won. This was rough.
He took all the bait and none of the opportunities.
Did Donald Trump miss a few opportunities? Absolutely.
Trump's own lapdog Senator Lindsey Graham told the Bulwark's Tim Miller that Trump's performance was a disaster and that his debate team should be fired. Sure, Lindsey, not Trump's fault at all. It was the people around him. The fact that it was a poor night for Donald must not have been lost on him, because how else do you explain him running to the spin room last night after the debate ended? The last 24 hours has all been about spin for the Trump campaign, to try and put lipstick on a pig and point the fingers everywhere else, anywhere else, in fact. This morning, Trump baselessly suggested, that Vice President Harris was given the questions beforehand.
They had a rigged show with somebody that maybe even had the answers. I mean, I'll be honest. I watched her talk, and I said, she seems awfully familiar with the questions, and you get pretty good at that stuff after a while.
Yeah. No, Donald. You know what that's called? That's called being prepared. Perhaps you should, think about that for next time. Maybe give it a shot. Joining me now is Jelani Cobb, Dean of Columbia University School of Journalism and MSNBC contributor. Olivia Troy, member of Republicans for Harris and former senior advisor to Vice President Mike Pence. Hugo Lowell, senior political correspondent for The Guardian. And Tommy Vietor, co-host of Pod Save America and Pod Save the World and co-author of Democracy or Else, How to Save America in 10 Easy Steps. Well, glad they're easy. We're going to have to get to that. We're going to have to talk about that book at some point, Tommy, because we're like, we got to save democracy, and if it's 10 steps, I'm with it. But I want to come to the table first. I want to first get you as the head of the Columbia School of Journalism. I love reminding people that you are the boss of the Columbia School of Journalism, which is pretty awesome. How the debate went, David Muir and Lindsey Davis, how'd they do, in your view?
Oh, I thought this was one of the best moderated debates I've ever seen.
I agree.
They were consistent, they were professional.
Yeah.
And one of the narratives has been around how frequently Donald Trump took the bait from Kamala Harris. I think one of the lesser discussed things is the fact that the moderators never took any bait.
Right.
That they continued, when he deflected, they would follow up, and that's one of the other things that people fail to do. Often with Donald Trump, he will give a non-answer and they'll just move on to the next question. They didn't do that. They did a judicious amount of fact-checking, so it wasn't intrusive. And they were like a referee in a boxing match where, you were there just to make sure that everyone is adhering to the rules, and then you're invisible.
Yeah.
It was just a banner example of how an event like that should be moderated.
Absolutely. And, I mean, they didn't always get an answer to their questions. Let me just play this. This is the little mash of Trump refusing to answer questions.
Would you veto a national abortion ban if it came to your desk?
Well, I won't have to.
But if I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D. in all fairness.
Just to clarify in the question, do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
9 years after you first started running, do you have a plan, and can you tell us what it is?
Obamacare was lousy health care. Always was. It's not very good today.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan.
And even though they didn't get an answer to the questions, they were persistent in fact-checking when he said something bizarre.
Right. And even when they didn't get an answer, it was obvious to the viewing public that he had not answered.
Right. Yes,
and so
they made
the
it clear.
follow-up was just to say, okay, this guy's not going to
You're not going to answer the question.
Right.
Let me play another clip. Olivia, you were there. You were in the room. This is, one of the best answers, I think, from Vice President Harris. It was a really strong answer, and it was about the abortion question after Donald Trump lied, as Lawrence O'Donnell put it, his biggest lie of saying that all of America, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, everybody wanted abortion returned to the states. Here was Vice President Harris's response.
One does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that.
Olivia, one of the things that Vice President Harris is going to have to do in order to win this election is to move over as many suburban white women voters as she can. How effective was that answer and her overall performance, in your view, in trying to do that, including Republican and independent women?
I think it was incredibly impactful. And I'll tell you this, like watching her on that debate stage as she spoke about the situation and the issue in that way, I think resonates with American people, American families and female voters. And I'll tell you, I'm glad that she spoke about faith and the way she delivered this on that stage, because I have seen her engage Republican women voters. In Michigan, I've seen her do this in person, where she talks about this issue. And it is so incredibly impactful the way she does it, because people feel like she is meeting them there, conservative women. She's meeting them halfway and talking about it the way we do, right? As people, the way we talk to each other, the way we talk to our friends. And I'll tell you, I was in Arizona last week meeting with Republican women voters on reproductive rights, and I was there with Hadley Duvall. And just having these conversations one-on-one with some of these women, there was a lot of emotion about what's happening around the country. And I think the way that Kamala Harris delivered that last night really resonates, because that's how women are feeling right now.
Yeah, and it is something that she has to do because, getting even a small percentage, a small movement of white women voters to get closer to 50-50 is really the ballgame. Hugo, you've reported to us before that the Trump strategy was basically, put your two fingers in your ears and pray that he does well in the debate. Well, that didn't happen. He didn't do well in the debate. What are they saying now?
Yeah, look, it's a universal acknowledgement that it was a bad night last night. They won't say it publicly, of course, but privately, multiple people on the Trump campaign were telling me through the night that, he sounded off, he sounded bad, he sounded rattled, and that basically he couldn't shake his anger. There was one Trump aide that I texted, and it really kind of summed it up for me, which was them saying, well, tonight was... Will they benefit us? Like, no, it will not. It will not benefit us. This will not convince any undecided voters to come to our side. This will not convince any independents to come to our side. And there was such a colossal missed opportunity. And the one thing that the Trump campaign was really kind of upset about and kind of disappointed about was they had prepped so many immigration-related responses, and Trump ultimately delivered none of them. He got kind of, as you pointed out, he got sidetracked and kind of obsessed with this whole Haitian immigrants eating pets thing, and they had prepped an outcome for that. And as the debate prep went, what he was supposed to do was to say, well, this is the story that's been coming out of Springfield, and then pivot to attacking Harris on the effects of illegal immigration on crime. Instead, he got bogged down in this. He got baited by Harris repeatedly, couldn't let it go, and then ended up arguing with the moderators. And the number of faceplant emojis that I got from Trump aides last night, I can't describe to you what a missed opportunity everyone thinks it was.
Maybe they just should have sat in front of him and said the word crowd size 400 times until he got over it. That maybe he could, get numb to it. Because the minute she said crowd size, that was the end of his mental stability.
Donald Trump's lies about fraudulent elections are having an impact. Nearly 1 in 6 election workers received threats of violence after the 2020 election, according to the Brennan Center for Justice. Joining me now is Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who testified today before Congress about the threats ahead of this November's election. Secretary Benson, it's great to see you. There's been a lot of dangerous things Donald Trump has said in recent days and weeks and years, but his lies last night about illegal, undocumented migrants coming in and a concerted effort to get them to vote fraudulently. What was your reaction when you heard him say that?
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Alex. It was really kind of a gut punch because it's not true. I mean, only U.S. citizens can vote in our elections. But what this type of rhetoric is designed to do is, one, create fear and stoke fear, obviously, and division. But secondly, also start to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of American citizens that our elections are anything other than secure and accurate, which they are. And then also to really set the stage to potentially try to challenge and overturn legitimate, fair, and accurate election results should he be unhappy with them come November. So it was really a harbinger of what could come and what's to come in the weeks ahead, and really in my view, a signal that we've all got to buckle up and try to rise above the noise and focus on the facts, which is that only U.S. citizens can vote in our elections.
Yeah, and it's hardly, without parallel. He's been saying stuff in recent days that should be ringing everybody's alarm. There was this Truth Social post he made on the 7th of September that said that there was rampant cheating in the 2020 election and that individuals who cheated will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, including election officials. I mean, the threats here are twofold, right? They're the threats against the undocumented migrants, which is part of his immigration portfolio. There is the threats to those who carry out the elections, election workers, and those who certify them, elections officials. From your vantage point, how much of a chilling effect is this having on the recruitment of people to work the polls and also those who are tasked with, certifying the elections and making sure state elections are run smoothly?
Yeah, well, it's essentially having two effects. One, there are people who are throwing up their hands and saying, you know what, it's not worth it. I want to stay home, and this isn't something where I want to put my family's life in jeopardy simply to just protect our election results. But actually, the vast majority of election officials in Michigan and across the country have seen this also as an opportunity to double down on our commitment to being professional, bipartisan, and ensuring transparent and secure elections continue to be the rule of the land. And so we've also seen an incredible emboldening of election officials who, yes, these are threats, and these are threats designed to intimidate us out of doing our duty and our jobs as election officials. But the vast majority of us have stepped into the fray knowing that after 2020, this is what we're signing up for, and we're ready. We're ready to stand guard and refuse to be intimidated. We won't back down, and we will protect every voice, every vote, regardless of how that vote is cast or who it's cast for, because we believe in democracy and, frankly, believe anyone running for office in this country should similarly believe in the truth and the facts and our election officials and stand with them instead of threatening them.
You know, and for people who don't understand what you personally have faced and are facing, your house has been swatted. You have received death threats. There is a Michigan lawmaker who has said you definitively will be prosecuted if Donald Trump wins again in 2024. I mean, that's an extraordinary amount of tenacity and resilience that's demanded of you and anyone else in your position. And how do you grapple with that? I mean, because of course it's not just you, it's also your family and the people around you.
Yeah, I mean, it is alarming and it is chilling, I mean, frankly, to just know that these powerful individuals with great megaphones, former president of the United States, would use that platform, his ambitions, to try to threaten us for simply just doing our jobs. And to know also, you know, I started my career investigating extremist groups and extreme leaders, and we know that that false, vitriolic, violent rhetoric often does result in threats and violence or worse against the people who are the targets. And so we realize the challenging moment that we're in, but we also realize our responsibility. These threats are ultimately not threats to us. They're threats to the American people. They're threats to the will of the voters and our democracy itself. And I'm proud to stand in the breach every day, and I know my colleagues are as well, because we embrace our responsibility to protect that basic promise of fair elections for our country, and will continue to defend the results of the elections, whatever they may be, this fall. And so that's really our message to the president. You can come at us with all the threats you want, and yes, it does create a harrowing environment for us to work through, but at the same time, we will not be deterred from doing our job with pride to protect the voice and votes of every citizen in this country.
Man, just a profile in courage. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, thank you on behalf of people interested in democracy. Thanks for your time tonight as well.